What is up? Welcome back to the channel. Let's go talk about one of the more controversial topics in fitness. So we're going to be talking about refeeds. Since everyone seems to have their own opinion on this matter, here's mine. Look at me, I'm on. Look at me, I'm on. Look at me, I'm on. But first, let's go over what a refeed is and what a refeed is not. I guess in the most basic sense, a refeed refers to a short period of time where you increase your calories to maintenance or maybe even to a slight surplus. Unlike a linear dieting approach where your calories stay the same throughout the week, a diet with refeeds will require you to reduce your calories throughout the week and increase calories on maybe 1 or maybe even 2 days in the week. That said, you'd still probably need to balance out the weekly average intake to lose fat. Now, one thing I think I need to clarify here is that a refeed is not a cheat meal. It is not a cheat day. A refeed follows certain restrictions like capping off your macros, or your calories, or maybe even limiting your food variety to your usual food options. Basically, you're just trying to eat a little bit more of your usual dieting foods and not so much trying to run around to a new buffet every weekend. Now, I think it is important to make this distinction between a refeed and a cheat meal or a cheat day, because I do see a lot of competitors using the word refeed while having around 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 calories, eating whatever they want, and eventually not hitting their mark on stage because they've been fucking up their average calorie intake week after week. Let's just quickly go over what a refeed is for. So what is the purpose of a refeed? This is just sort of my opinion, but the main reason why I like to give my clients refeeds is to provide more of a mental break. So from the usual deficit, it acts like a little bit of a reward system. So it does help them with their adherence during an extended or monotonous or a difficult fat loss phase. Another good reason to throw in a refeed is to increase or to improve muscle fullness. So I'm sure if you've had any experience with deep dieting and you've taken a cheat meal or you've had a cheat day, you've probably noticed that the next day after overeating, that is if you haven't overeaten to the point of extreme uncomfortable bloating, you look bigger, you look better, and the pumps in the gym will be very, very good. And I think, as you'd expect from this, the added fullness and the improved mental state from the dieting can also aid in your training performance, which is why I often like throwing in refeeds on or before the last or the most difficult training session of the week. I have a feeling these might be some of the major reasons for the improved muscle retention over, let's say, more linear dieting. I mean, you're in a better state to focus on your lifting, you're feeling a lot better, you can focus on progressive overload for the next few days, so it does make some sense. So ayun, that's sustainability and adherence, muscle fullness, improved training performance, and possibly muscle retention. But I do have one more reason, and this will be more specific to competitors, and that is refeeds can keep you from, let's just say, forgetting what maintenance feels like. So this makes it a little bit easier to plan for potential peak weeks, to reduce trial and error, where you should have some sort of baseline as to, let's say, how many grams of carbs or how many calories you can handle in one go, or how your macro ratios can affect your fullness before and during your show days. This is something you can't really do on a linear diet, especially if you're trying to crash diet into a show. So this probably works best if you have, if you have more time, if you're in a longer prep, and you have some time to throw in some refeeds. Now, related to this, I do also feel like having regular refeeds in during a prep could be helpful during the post-show period. Again, you're a little bit more familiar with what a higher calorie intake feels like and what it looks like. You probably wouldn't feel as surprised once you step out of a show. Although I would expect this to be much more effective if you're doing maybe something more extended, so like an extended refeed or maybe even a diet break. But that's something we're probably gonna have to save for the next video. Okay, so now that you know why refeeds are important, let's just go over how you can implement them and how you can execute them successfully. In general, you'd probably want to push for maintenance or slightly above by increasing mostly from carbs for at least 24 hours. I think there are more physiological benefits related to complete glycogen replenishment when you're doing 48-hour refeeds or longer, but for most of the good stuff, I think you'd be fine with 24-hour refeeds. Another thing you might want to remember is to keep your food variety close to your current dieting food options. That is mainly to reduce any unnecessary fluctuations related to sodium or to digestion or maybe possible food intolerances. Ayun, mostly the same food, maybe a little or not so little treat if it's not some weird dish you've never had before. One common, as in super common mistake that I see is when someone takes their refeed day or their refeed days as an opportunity to eat out like the whole time, like 3 meals or 5 meals or 7 meals throughout that whole refeed. They're eating out. Sure, a single meal probably won't mess up your refeed, but if you're eating multiple meals outside and you're consuming unfamiliar dishes, unfamiliar ingredients, which can get hard to track, which can be fairly inconsistent, you could easily mess up your weekly averages. Another thing to note is that when you're planning for a refeed, you need to be mindful of how high you're making the refeed days. So if you set your calories too high on a refeed day, it might actually force the rest of your days to be way too low. So you'll need to control your cravings, to control your urges, and find a good balance between what you'll call your replenishment and your training performance. That should be fairly clear at this point. Now let's just quickly go over who I, at least personally, think needs to use a refeed and who may be better off with a more linear dieting approach. So first, if you're a competitor and you're deep into prep, trying to maintain as much muscle mass as possible while also trying to retain some sort of sanity, I think refeeds can definitely be helpful. Second, if you're running a longer prep and you find yourself to be way ahead of schedule in terms of fat loss, it might not be a bad idea to throw in more or bigger refeeds to intentionally bring up this weekly caloric intake. If that is the case, you might also want to consider taking a diet break. However, if you are a competitor and you find yourself binging harder on your refeeds because of the drastic restrictions on your low days, it's possible you might feel a little bit better by throwing in more balanced or more even, more spread out calories across the entire week. If you're just here for a casual and let's just say a quick 8 to 12, maybe a 16-week cut, and you're not actually trying to get into the deep single-digit body fat percentages, then you probably won't be needing a refeed. I mean, you could if you have the time to do it, and there's really no downsides to doing it, but it probably would just be faster to roll with linear dieting, and I think you just wouldn't really be able to maximize many of the potential benefits of refeeds the same way you would in a long and highly strenuous contest prep diet. In the end, refeeding in itself won't make or break your fat loss goals. You'll still have to refer back to your average intakes over multiple days or weeks or months, but it is a great tool you can use for a number of reasons, and honestly, it doesn't seem to have too many downsides, but it's definitely not a requirement. It's not a required part of your dieting, and neither is it some magical trick you have to do to lose fat. So that would be all for today's video. If you learned something from this, leave a thumbs up, share the video to your fellow meatheads, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I will see you guys in the next one.